The house at the end of town. I grew up in a town that you could cross end to end in 15 minutes if you didn't mind cutting through backyards. It was the kind of place where the same dog chased the same mailman every weekday at 10 a.m., where you could tell the month by the color of the flyers in the diner window, and where secrets never stayed buried for long, unless they were buried in the house at the end of Stenton Road. Everyone just called it the house. The address had faded off the warped mailbox, and the number on the porch post had fallen away years before I was born. It sat at the town's last bend, where the pavement narrowed and the streetlights gave up. The structure leaned into a cluster of skeletal elms like a drunk shouldering a friend. Even in summer, the trees around it refused leaves, as if some petty dispute with the soil kept them bare. Windows were boarded. The roof shingles curled like dead fish. Kids told each other it was haunted. Parents said it was condemned. Either way, people crossed the street when they passed it. I never felt the need to prove anything to the house. I wasn't the kid who spat on electric fences or lay on the double yellow line to hear semis roar past. But there's a particular kind of boredom that sits in small-town summers, the kind that starts to itch at the edges of your brain until you scratch it and draw blood. By the July after graduation, my friends and I were restless and too broke to do more than drive in circles, park at the river, and repeat. We talked about leaving, about apartments in cities that had museums and events and strangers who didn't know your middle name, but every conversation turned into a countdown to the inevitable. We'd scatter in August. Until then, we were here, with the house, and the itch, and the heat. There were 3 of us that night. Me, Cam, and Derek. We'd been friends since middle school, bound by proximity and the same impulse to argue about nothing. Cam's car smelled like energy drinks in a mechanic's shop, which made sense. His uncle let him sweep the garage for cash and all the scents of summer-hot rubber, motor oil. Pine cleaner clung to him like a second shirt. Derek had learned to hide cigarettes from his parents, but not their smell. I didn't have a job yet, and I didn't smoke. My contribution was a Maglite with corroded batteries and a cautious sense that might have looked like cowardice if I said it out loud. We had planned to drive down to the river and throw stones at cattails like always, but Cam was the kind of guy who didn't like repeating moves when he could improvise. He took the long turn onto Stenton Road without saying why, and when the asphalt narrowed and the dark bloomed around us, we all knew. "Don't," I said, before I could stop myself. "Don't what?" Cam smiled. The house slid into view. Headlights picked out the scabby paint, the ripped screen door. The porch were a swing hung by one chain. Derek leaned forward between us. "You hear they're finally going to tear it down?" he said casually. "Town council approved a grant. Couple months from now, gone." "Good," I said. "Let it go." "Which is exactly why," Cam said, rolling to a stop. "We should be the last ones to see inside." We sat in his idling car and watched the house watch us back. There was no wind. The elms stuck their branches into the sky like prongs on a broken crown. A moth smacked itself dumbly against the windshield and fell to the wipers. "People go in there," Derek said. "Folks have found squatters. Folks also say there's a piano that plays itself," Cam countered. "It's all stories. Come on. 5 minutes. We go in, we look around, and we leave. Final tour." I should have said I'd wait in the car. I should have said my aunt's neighbor had keys to the volunteer firehouse and loved snitching on teens who trespassed. I should have said a lot of things. But between the 3 of us, "should" was a word that showed up after the adrenaline wore off, never before it started. I felt the itch in my brain turn into heat in my chest, and I heard myself say, 5 minutes. We killed the engine, and the world went quiet, the way it only does when you remove the veneer of human effort, a hum cut mid-note. Our doors clicked open too loud. Gravel bit our shoes. The air smelled like hot dirt and something sweet and overripe. The way it smells when fruit falls and rots under a tree no one tends. Up close, the house looked less like a haunted place and more like a tired one. The porch stairs sagged. A coil of old garden hose lay stiff in a corner, the kind with fabric braiding, from before anything was made of plastic. On the doorframe, a polite warning weathered into a threat. "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." The word prosecuted had peeled, so the P drooped like a tongue. Cam tried the handle. It stuck. He grinned at us, took a step back, and kicked. The door thudded but held. "Jesus," I said. "Relax." He huffed and shouldered it instead. The wood gave with a sound like someone sighing through a mouthful of splinters. Derek went first, which surprised me. He was brave in the way of careless people. He flicked his phone's flashlight on, and the beam cut a rectangle in the dark. Dust drifted through it, floating and falling like indifferent snow. I raised my mag light. Its weak cone added a smear next to Derek's. Cam went last and shut the door behind him. Out of habit or instinct, I couldn't tell. The latch caught with a small, final click that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The room we'd entered had been a living room once, and some of it remembered how. A collapsed couch leaned its guts against the floorboards. A rug tripped over itself under the debris. The air was stale in a way that stole the moisture from your tongue. I heard the house crack and settle around us. Something scuttled in a corner and disappeared. The ceiling had a water stain the size of a lake, its tributaries mapping the path of years of leaks. "Smells like mummified raccoon," Derek muttered. "You know," Cam said. "Check this out." He crouched by a crate that had been tucked under a window and lifted its lid. Inside lay a stack of plates that had fused together by dirt, a glass ashtray with a starburst pattern, and a mason jar full of buttons. He held one up. The plastic had gone a yellow that made it look diseased. "People just leave," I said. Not sure if I meant it. "They pack, but they leave pieces." "They move the old man to the home," Derek said. "That's what my mom told me. Before I was born, he didn't have kids. House went to the bank or to the county or just Saturday." As he spoke, I realized the dust didn't just move, because we stirred it. Air flowed, very faint, from somewhere deeper in the house. A draft. That meant a door, or a gap. I shifted my light toward a hallway, and the beam found picture frames on the wall, their faces turned to the plaster as if ashamed. One frame had fallen and cracked. Through the glass, under the spiderweb fractures, a black and white photograph of a boy and a dog looked up at no one. "Okay," Cam said, clapping his hands softly, like he was calling us back from a daydream. 5 minutes. Timer starts now." We followed the hallway. The floorboard rhythm beneath our feet made a song of our trespass. Step, creak. Step, creak. To the right, a small bathroom hawked its fractured mirror. To the left, a bedroom's door sulked open. The walls here were painted a green that you couldn't buy anymore. The particular tone of kitchens where old women baked pies. In the bedroom, a single bed frame held a mattress that had liquefied into a shape like a lake. Someone had been here after the abandonment, that much was obvious. A newer blanket lay crumpled in a corner. A half-empty water bottle sweated condensation that shouldn't exist in a place this airless. "Guys," I said quietly. "I see it," Derek answered, forgetting to sound brave. "Someone's still using this place." Cam shrugged. "Or used. Like weeks ago." "How can you tell?" I asked. He tilted the bottle. Water sloshed. "Because it's not dusty." "Then we should go," I said. That should have been the moment we turned and left. Maybe a different version of us would have. Maybe there's a world where I didn't say anything. And we reached the back door and out, found the fresh night with our lungs, laughed in the car, and then never talked about it again. But this was our world, and in it, Derek's light picked up something on the far wall. He took a step toward it, and we followed because gravity works that way on people who are close. At first, I thought it was a drawing line scratched into paint, but it was too careful, too symmetrical. It was a calendar of some sort, hand-drawn grids stacked one over the other, month atop month, year after year. Each square bore a mark, a dot, a dash, a small X, sometimes a tiny circle. Beneath the calendar, in a childish block print, someone had written a legend. Dot equals here. Dash equals there. X equals gone. O equals watch. "Creepy," Cam said softly, and I agreed with him more than I wanted to. There were dozens of months, all half-faded and overlapping, like someone had drawn the same calendar over itself repeatedly, refusing to let years pass without proof. Some squares had multiple marks. Some were empty and smeared as though someone had rubbed them with a thumb. "Here, there, gone, watch," Derek read. "What does that mean?" "Maybe, I don't know," I said. "Like a nurse marking meds? Or a kid playing a game? Or..." Something knocked upstairs. All three of us froze. Not a house sound, not a pipe or a settling beam, or the sympathetic thump of a closing door. A knock. 3 beats, steady as a metronome. Somewhere directly above us. In the dark we hadn't yet disturbed. Cam moved first. "Squirrels," he said, with confidence he did not own. He lifted his chin at the staircase at the end of the hall. We look and leave. I didn't want to follow him. My legs had turned to the kind of dough that people shape into pretzels. But some ugly pride woke in me. If I said no, they'd go without me. If they went without me, I'd be the one who stayed behind, alone in the hallway with the calendar and the water bottle and the knowledge that someone had formatted time like that and then left it bleeding into the wall. I gripped my maglite, which suddenly felt more like a talisman than a tool, and followed. The stairs were steep and mean. They complained under our weight, made us climb in a slow-motion symphony of groans. At the top, a narrow landing opened into 2 rooms. The one on the left peered back at us through a doorway with no door. The one on the right had a door, but it sat slightly ajar, a mouth, breathing a thin line of darkness. "Left first," Cam whispered. "We always went left first. I don't know why. It felt like we were obeying some rule we didn't remember learning. The left room had been a child's once. The leftover evidence clung to it. A wallpaper border of balloons that had cracked along their colors. A shelf of books swollen with damp, their spines bowed. A lamp with a shade that had been drawn on with marker or crayon. Hard to tell. On the floor, near the window, someone had laid out clothing in a neat square, like a folded person. The shirt's collar pointed toward the door. The pants were rolled at the cuffs. There were no shoes. "Okay," Derek said. "That's enough." We turned to go, and the door to the right room closed. Not slammed, not violently. It simply eased shut, as if someone on the other side had grown tired of the draft. The small latch settled with the softest snick. The 3 of us stared at it. My palms cooled. There is a way your heart can hit you from inside, like it's trying to escape through your ribs. And then there's a different way it can fail to do anything at all. Just long enough for you to hear the bloodless echo of how quiet the world would be without it. I felt both at once. Cam put his hand on the doorknob. "Don't," I whispered. He looked back, an apology in his eyes that also said he had to. He turned it. The knob moved freely. The door opened into the kind of dark that seems thoughtfully arranged, a dark that doesn't spill when you prod it. Derek's phone light held it back like a broom against a flood, and then the broom failed. It was a bedroom, a larger one. The window here was boarded from the outside, so no streetlight could insinuate itself in. Our beams found a bed with a headboard taller than me, carved with vines. A dresser with a cracked mirror. A chair in a corner, facing the door, occupied. The man sitting in the chair was thin in the way of people who have become a habit to themselves. He wore layered clothes despite the heat. A flannel shirt, a winter coat with its zipper broken, a knit cap pulled down to eyebrows. His beard was gray and sparse. His eyes were the only thing about him that was bright. They glossed and reflected our light, and then held steady. We froze. He didn't. He lifted one hand and, almost apologetically, placed a finger over his mouth. "Shh," he said not loudly. "You'll wake her." Cam swallowed. We didn't mean to." The man shook his head politely. He pointed at the bed. "She's sleeping." Derek's light slid over the bedspread and found a shape beneath it. Not a person's shape. Or maybe it was. From a perspective I didn't want to consider. A mound long and low, all edges softened by the blanket that had become a skin. The blanket moved. I took a step back. The floor complained. The man's eyes cut to mine, warning and weary at once. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "It's not a good day." "Okay," Cam said quickly. "We'll go." I tried to say sorry, and produced nothing. I tried to breathe through my nose, and felt a lace of old perfume on the air. A sweet, powdery ghost that made my throat clutch. The blanket on the bed settled, then rose again with a slow inhale. I knew what old pipes sounded like. I knew how buildings exhaled, and how vermin made their tiny scrabbling lives. This wasn't that. This was a breath, and what made it worst was that it was tired. "She doesn't like visitors," the man said softly. "She gets confused. She thinks she has to entertain. She gets up. She tries to make tea." His gaze went far for a second, or years. "She forgets the stove." Something thunked beneath the bed, a dull and honest sound like an elbow against wood. The man didn't flinch. He looked back at us and, with infinitely formal politeness, nodded toward the hallway. "Out," he said, quietly. We didn't need telling twice. We reversed slowly, my heel scuffing the threshold. The door wanted to swing closed again of its own accord. The man's hand drifted up and steadied it open just enough to allow us through. As we slipped past, the house made a sound like a throat clearing. Then the man, still seated, whispered after us with that same funeral softness, "Mark your day." We found the staircase by instinct. None of us spoke. The house pressed itself around us, harder now, impatient, like someone holding a finger to your spine and guiding you by pressure alone. Down the steps, through the hallway, through the living room where the couch had spilled its stuffing like trapped snow, and to the front door, Cam fumbled the latch. It caught, and then relented. The door opened onto a lungful of night and the honest, shapeless sound of crickets. We stepped out, and the air changed cooler, unbreathed, new. The door closed behind us with a tidy click. We didn't run. That would have made us the kind of people who heard a gunshot and sprinted toward it out of curiosity. We walked, steadily, like gentlemen leaving a room where someone had said something embarrassing. Gravel cracked underfoot. I counted my steps because numbers felt safer than thoughts. 23 from the porch to the curb. Another 20 to the car. Cam unlocked it with a chirp that sounded profane in the quiet. We got in. No one spoke until the engine turned and gave us back the hum of human endeavor. Cam drove. Stenton Road widened again as if in relief. The first streetlight we passed put on a small wedding over the hood. We didn't look at each other until we reached the open stretch by the ball fields, where the town pretended it was bigger than it was. Cam pulled into the gravel lot and cut the engine again. We listened to our breathing, like it belonged to someone else. "What the hell was that?" Derek said finally. It wasn't a question. It was a demand for the world to explain itself. "A squatter," I said automatically. "A guy. An old guy living in the house. Maybe he used to own it. Maybe he never left. Maybe he found it later. People do that." "And the bed?" Cam asked. The thing in the bed?" "His wife," I said, because it was better than saying something. "Maybe. I don't know. She was there. She was breathing," Derek whispered. I heard it. "So did I said. "So did we all." We sat there. Cars drifted by, headlights in pairs like slow meteors. Somewhere, a dog objected to the night. After a while, Cam rubbed his eyes with his knuckles, the way kids do when they're tired and don't want to admit it. He said, "Mark your day," he murmured. "You heard that too," Derek said. I heard it, I said. The phrase wriggled under my skin. "Mark your day, like the calendar in the hallway. Here, there, gone, watch." "Guys," Derek said, and his voice had gone small. "On the wall, those marks. What if they were like keeping track of when she was here or not? Or when we come..." Cam finished, but he didn't sound like he believed it even as he said it. He couldn't know, though. He didn't have to know it was us, Derek said. Just that people come sometimes. Kids, like us. "Then why watch?" I asked. "Who's watching?" No one answered. There are questions that open rooms, and there are questions that open basements. We had already seen one room too many that night. We didn't go to the river. We didn't drive in circles. Cam drove me home, and then Derek, and then himself, presumably, and we all pretended to sleep. In the morning, I woke to a town that had taken its mask off for daylight and found my parents arguing about taxes and the grocery list and the waste management schedule. The itch in my brain had been replaced by a bruise. I tried to tell myself we'd imagined the worst of what we saw. Memory puts a filter on things. It exaggerates shadows, edits sounds, adds music. Maybe the man had been asleep in the chair, and we'd startled him, and he'd startled us back. Maybe the shape in the bed had been a pile of blankets breathing with the draft. Maybe he'd said, "Lock the door," and my mind, primed for a story, had translated. I almost believed it, until the evening news rattled out of the TV in the kitchen 2 nights later. No signs of foul play, the anchor was saying. The house on Stenton Road had been scheduled for demolition later this year. My mother turned the volume up. A drone shot hovered over the house, which looked almost picturesque from that high angle. Its decay, a kind of honest scenery. The reporter's voice took over. A man believed to be in his late 60s was discovered deceased in an upstairs room. Authorities say he appeared to have lived in the home for some time. A second body, found in the adjacent bedroom, has not yet been identified. The camera cut to a close-up of the front porch. The yellow of police tape brightened everything else by contrast. A man in a suit said words that added up to nothing. Tragic. Isolated. Ongoing investigation. Then the drone view again, the elms like fingers, the sense that the house had been waiting for a curtain call for years and finally got it. My mother made a small, involuntary sound. God, she said. That place. I excused myself to the bathroom and leaned over the sink with both hands braced on porcelain. I stared at my face in the mirror until it blurred into a stranger who looked like he knew something he wished he didn't. Behind me, a calendar hung on the wall, the pharmacy's promotional kind with glossy photographs of lighthouses and improbable herbs. Without thinking, I picked up the felt tip pen my father kept by the phone, and in the square that held the day we'd gone to the house, I made a small circle. O. I put the pen down. My hands shook more than I liked. I told myself it was a joke, a private nod to the weirdness of it all. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself a lot of things because that's what people do when they find a shape under a blanket and need it to be anything other than what it might be. I didn't tell Cam or Derek about the news. I didn't have to. Within an hour, we were on a group chat we barely used anymore, sending each other the same link, the same curse words, the same questions. Derek typed, "We didn't touch anything, right?" Cam typed, "We didn't touch anything." I typed, "We didn't touch anything." It felt like casting a spell. The town did what towns do. It offered opinions and casseroles. The house became a story, then a topic, then an anecdote, then a caution. The police tape fell to the ground after a day of rain. The sun did its work on the boards and the paint and the memory of the two bodies inside. A week later, I walked past the diner and heard the waitress tell a trucker that she'd always known something was wrong in that place. She said it with the certainty of people who have never been wrong about anything that matters because they've never risked an opinion that did. August arrived like a train you hear long before it gets to the station. I packed boxes with my name on them. Cam found a studio apartment 3 towns over where the rent was a dare. Derek enlisted in a program that promised to teach him a trade and keep him from getting bored. We met at the river once more and threw stones we didn't name. None of us suggested Stenton Road. We didn't forbid it. We simply let it drop into the water and sink. 2 days before I left, I walked to the end of my street at dusk because the air felt like it was trying to remember rain. I turned right instead of left, and then right again, and then I found myself at the top of Stenton without meaning to, the way your feet sometimes carry you to church, on a day that isn't Sunday if you were taught to kneel. The house waited at the bend, patient as ever. The police tape had snagged on the porch rail and fluttered in a wind that didn't seem to touch anything else. A city notice was stapled to the front door. Demolition scheduled. Beneath the stamp, someone had written in small, neat letters, as if to themselves, "Here." I stood at the curb and stared, and then I turned away. I walked home in the blue that comes before dark. At the corner of Willow and Main, a girl on a bike cut in front of me and made me step off the curb. When my foot found the road, I looked down and saw, stuck to the asphalt, a small paper circle from a hole puncher, the color of clouds. It clung to the tar as if it had been placed and not fallen. It was nothing. It was trash. I stepped over it carefully anyway. That night I couldn't sleep, not for fear, but for the slow, persistent sense that something had stepped into the room with me and sat in a chair and waited. I got up, went to the kitchen, and poured water into a glass. The calendar by the phone showed a glossy lighthouse, its beam printed in a white that ink can't quite make luminous. In the square for the day the news aired about the house, I put a small X, gone. The pen bled a little into the paper. I thought about the man in the chair, polite and exhausted, and the breath under the blanket, and the way he'd said, "Mark your day," like a benediction. I thought about how some people keep time not by hours, but by visits, by departures, by returns that aren't really returns. I thought about how the house had held them, and how we had stepped into that holding just long enough to be noted. In the morning, I loaded my boxes into my car. My father clapped my shoulder in the way of men who have learned to keep love from embarrassing anyone. My mother tucked a bag of cookies into my passenger seat, as if sugar could persuade shadows to be merciful. I looked at our kitchen calendar again before I left. 2 marks, a circle and an X. I resisted the urge to add a 3rd mark for leaving. There wasn't a symbol for that on the legend upstairs, and I didn't want to invent one. On my way out of town, I didn't drive down Stenton. I didn't need to. The bend would be there. The house would slouch into its elms a little longer, then less, then not at all. In a year, there would be a vacant lot seeded with the wrong kind of grass, and someone would cut it with a mower and think about sports. In 5 years, a new house might stand there with vinyl siding and an attached garage, and a kid would stand in the doorway and complain that nothing interesting ever happened in this town. If that kid asks, I won't tell him the story. I won't say that once, late one summer, We stepped into a tired house at the end of a tired road and found a man who wanted peace for someone who couldn't keep it. I won't say that we marked our day because he told us to. I won't say that sometimes the most frightening thing you can find in a place you shouldn't be is not a monster or a message or a hand in the dark, but a life that has continued without permission. But I will think it. And when I see a calendar, I will feel the itch in my brain and the heat in my chest and the cool of a night where the crickets tried to explain something and failed. And when I think of the house, I will try very hard not to count the days between dot and dash and X and O, because I am too old now to believe that time behaves because we box it in. Still, some nights, when the room is quiet enough, I hear a small, polite voice in the corner say, "Shh, you'll wake her." And I realize he isn't warning me so much as himself. Then I mark the day in my mind, not because I must, but because I trespassed once into someone else's time, and for a breath, became part of their keeping. Lost in the industrial graveyard. The town I grew up in had its ghosts, but not all of them lived in houses. Some lived in the skeletons of factories, structures that had once given thousands of people purpose, wages, and smoke-choked skies, and now offered nothing but silence and rust. When I was 21, photography was the only thing that made me feel like I had control over something. My life was in pieces, parents divorcing, girlfriend gone, job prospects thin as paper, but a camera let me capture things that couldn't run away, couldn't lie, couldn't leave. I called it urban exploration when I described it to anyone, though I knew the simpler word was trespassing. The building that drew me that summer was a steel plant on the west side, shuttered for decades. Everyone in town knew someone who had worked there, but no one ever talked about it fondly. My uncle called it a graveyard of hands, too many accidents, too many fingers, fed to machines hungry for more than iron. Still, it was perfect for my lens. Cracked windows, graffitied walls, shafts of sunlight turning dust into golden rain. I wanted it on film before the city decided to tear it down. I parked 3 blocks away, just in case, and carried only what I needed. My Nikon, a tripod, and a flashlight. The air around the plant felt wrong as soon as I stepped closer, like the air was thicker there, swollen with decades of exhalations that never dispersed. The gate had a chain, but someone else had already cut it. A hollow welcome. Inside, weeds had grown taller than children. Graffiti stretched across every surface. Initials, slurs, crooked cartoon faces, some of it already layered over, like people had fought wars with spray cans. But deeper in, I noticed a different kind of marking. Symbols that weren't words. Spirals. Crosses with too many arms. Circles intersecting circles. I told myself they were tags gang stuff maybe, or just bored kids copying something from the internet. Still, I lifted my camera and took a shot. The flash burst against the wall, and the sound bounced around the empty metal bones of the plant like gunfire. The noise didn't die the way it should have. Instead, it felt answered. A metallic clang rang from somewhere ahead, like a steel rod dropped onto concrete. I froze, ears straining. Probably just wind, I muttered to myself, even though no breeze stirred the suffocating heat. Still, I followed. The factory floor opened up like a cathedral gutted of its faith. Broken machinery hunched in rows, their belts slack, their gears grinning with rust. My flashlight beam glided across them, and more than once I thought I saw movement between them, shadows moving differently from the way shadows should. When I paused to set my tripod, the silence pressed closer. I clicked the shutter, and the flash filled the space. For the half second it illuminated, I saw them. 2 men, standing behind a support column 30 feet away. They weren't kids. Their posture was wrong for kids. Their faces were pale ovals, reflecting the flash-like paper. Their eyes didn't squint against the light, they just stared, unblinking. Then the dark returned, and they were gone. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, but my hands betrayed me. They trembled too hard to be lying. My camera hung heavy on my chest. Against every instinct, I raised it again, turned, and snapped another shot. Flash. Empty machinery. Flash. A rusted staircase leading nowhere. Flash. The same support column now empty. The men had moved. I whispered to myself, just homeless guys. Just squatters. I could almost accept that, except the air had changed. It felt crowded, though I still stood alone in the silence. I forced myself deeper, telling myself I wanted one last picture before leaving. Just one shot that justified the risk. That's when I found the rooms. Most of the factory was open floor, but in the back there were sections walled off into smaller chambers, storage spaces, offices, maybe break rooms. The door to one hung open, and a dim yellow glow spilled out. I killed my flashlight and blinked into the faint light. A lamp, plugged into an outlet that somehow still worked, glowed in the corner of the room. Next to it sat a mattress, neat as a showroom bed. Someone was living here. On the wall above the mattress, drawn in precise black lines, was a circle filled with symbols. Not graffiti this time. Something older, stranger. My skin prickled as though I'd stepped into a fever. I raised my camera and snapped the photo. Flash. For a moment, the symbols shone. The air seemed to warp, like heat rising off asphalt. I swear I heard a whisper too close to my ear, though no one stood there. I turned and fled, half running down the corridor. My footfalls echoed like someone was following, matching me step for step. When I spun, nothing was there. But my heart wasn't fooled. I reached the main hall again, gasping. I wanted nothing more than to see the open doorway and the night sky beyond, to stumble back into the world of traffic and streetlights. But instead, I heard a sound. Not behind me, not to the side, above. A chorus of footsteps on the catwalk. I lifted my flashlight, beam trembling, and caught them. Figures. More than 2 this time. 5, maybe 6. They stood along the rusted railing, their faces half hidden, their bodies still as statues. Only their heads moved, turning in unison to follow the light, to follow me. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered and rolled, beam spinning across the floor like a dizzy star. In its sweep, the light caught the walls more of those symbols, painted in black, circling the entire hall. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted. My boots slammed the concrete, my camera bouncing against my chest. The factory seemed to twist, its corridors longer, its machinery closer, funneling me away from the exit. I stumbled, fell, and the camera smacked against the ground. Pain tore through my knee, but adrenaline dragged me back up. I grabbed the flashlight, barely working now, and turned it toward the gate I had entered. There it was. Salvation. But something stood in front of it. One of the men. I saw him clearly this time, pale skin stretched too tight. Eyes like ink smears, mouth half open as if frozen midward. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The message was clear. You're not leaving. I don't remember making the decision. I just ran toward him, screaming. Flashlight in one hand, camera in the other. At the last second, the beam flickered across his face, empty sockets, no eyes at all. And then, he was gone. I didn't slow. I crashed through the gate, tearing skin from my arms, and sprinted until the plant was blocks behind me. My car waited where I'd left it. Somehow, I'd kept the camera clutched in my hand. At home, I locked the doors and turned every light on. My hands shook as I pulled the memory card and loaded the photos onto my computer. Most were normal, rusted steel, graffiti, broken windows. But the last 4 weren't. One showed the 2 men behind the column, exactly as I'd seen them. Another showed them closer, though I hadn't moved. A third was nothing but black, except for 2 pale faces hovering in the center. And the last was a picture of me. Not taken from my camera's perspective, but from across the hall. My own face caught mid-run, eyes wide, mouth open. Behind me, in the blur of my movement, the pale figures swarmed closer. I deleted the files. I smashed the memory card. I wanted to destroy the camera itself, but something inside me whispered that wouldn't matter. Because when I woke the next morning, there was a new photograph on my desk. Not on the camera. Not on the computer. A printed photo, curled at the edges. It showed me asleep in my bed. And in the corner of the room, just visible in the grain, stood one of the pale men, watching. The boundary of pines. We didn't plan on trespassing. That's the first thing I tell myself when I wake up from the dream and taste pine resin, like I chewed bark in my sleep. We didn't look for trouble. We looked for quiet. My brother and I had argued about everything that summer, who was moving out first, who owed who gas money, who got the old tent, and we thought a night under trees would reset something in us. That's what our dad used to say. Go where you can hear your thoughts, and you'll find the ones worth keeping. The problem was the signs. They weren't there when we were kids. Back then, the west side of Crescent National Forest was just a web of logging roads and deer trails. Now there were posts where the dirt lane narrowed, and new aluminum plaques that flashed like fish scales when sunlight hit them. Restoration, Aria do not enter. Some had a second line in smaller text. Section 12. B. They were official enough to make you feel small, but not official enough to scare you off. If you'd already driven 2 hours and told yourself this was the only weekend you and your brother would have before August tore your schedules. Apart. Section 12. B. Eli said it like an address. He rolled the words over his tongue, amused. What happened to A? Ischroge. Maybe B stands for bitter nut. He grinned at me over the steering wheel. We'll be quick. We were quick. We parked where the gravel turned to ruts, chucked our packs on, and stepped over the chain strung between 2 posts. At our feet, boot prints went both ways. People had been ignoring the sign long before we did. The trail wasn't a trail so much as a memory of one. The forest closed around us immediately, the kind of green that absorbs sound. I could hear my own breath and the soft clatter of the metal mug on Eli's pack. Sunlight shingled through high branches and rarely made it to the ground. I thought of cathedrals, not because I'd been in many, but because I'd seen photos and the forest light did the same thing stone does with shadow. It made it into a substance that felt like it could fall on you if you spoke too loudly. Think the Rangers come out here much? Eli asked. He had a way of sounding like he was joking even when he wasn't. They'd need a reason, I said. We're a reason, and we're going to be quick. Behind us, the forest stitched the space we made right back up, like we were walking through fabric. We found the creek first. It wasn't supposed to be here. The maps we grew up with showed a stream a mile north, but this water cut a fresh line through the ground, shallow and clear as glass. It moved quietly over stones glittered with mica. On the bank, someone had planted a row of thin stakes with strips of blue survey tape tied around them, the cheap kind that flutters like impatient hands. What are they restoring? Eli asked, crouching to cup water in his palms. Everything, I said. The tape snapped in a breeze I couldn't feel. The blue strips didn't move randomly. They seemed to wag in sequence, one, then the next, as if answering each other. We followed the creek because it gave us a direction. An hour later, when the light had slipped into the yellow, that means you're late, we found a place flat enough to pitch the tent, a shelf of earth between 2 leaning pines. Someone had camped here before. The black scar of an old fire ring still smudged the ground. That should have reassured me, but it didn't. Strangers' leftovers always remind me that the wilderness keeps records. Eli hammered stakes with a heel rock. I inflated the sleeping pads and rolled my jacket into a pillow the way I always do, like I'm tucking something away that might be needed in a hurry. It felt routine, and routine makes most places safe. We ate jerky and bread, drank coffee strong enough to make our teeth hum, and as the shadows gathered, so did the kind of conversation brothers save for the dead center of nowhere. You ever think about leaving for good? Eli asked into the first darkness. Like picking a place on a map and saying, that's where I'm supposed to be. You can't be supposed to be anywhere you haven't seen, I said. You can only be supposed to seek. He snorted. You sound like Dad. I sound like a guy who can't afford a bus ticket. We laughed. The way you laugh when you're both wrong and neither of you cares enough to say it. Somewhere in the trees, a barred owl let out the old joke about who cooks for you. The creek murmured itself to sleep. I stretched out on my pad and listened to Eli snore in the intermittent way. He always had 2 slow waves, then a little choke like he'd forgotten to breathe. I stared at the tent roof and traced the seams with my eyes until my thoughts blurred into dreams. I woke to the sound of someone laughing. It was close. Not in the way that makes your brain jump straight to right outside the tent, but close enough to knock on the door if it had wanted to. A soft, breathy laugh, like a secret told to the wrong person. I bolted upright, careful not to shake the whole tent. Eli's silhouette lay still. Eli, I whispered. He made a noise that could have meant anything. Do you hear that? The laugh came again. It could have been a woman or a boy. It could have been 2 people, almost overlapping. It didn't belong here. People sound different when there aren't walls around them. They sound too big. Whoever was laughing sounded like they were in a room. I unzipped the tent a fraction and pressed my eye to the gap. The night outside took its time to assemble itself into shapes. The fuel canister near the dead fire pit. The ghost white ridge of Eli's mug where we'd left it on a log. Trees as vertical shadows. The creek beyond. A ribbon of reflected starlight. Hello? I called before I could stop myself. The forest answered by deciding to be very quiet. I held my breath until I felt stupid, let it out, and zipped the tent back up. My watch said 2:13. When I closed my eyes, I saw the blue survey tape moving like it had hands. I listened for the laugh and didn't hear it again. Once a branch cracked somewhere deep in the trees. Then the kind of silence that gets inside your head and rearranges furniture. I must have fallen asleep because morning came gently. Birds made their complicated maps over our clearing. The air had that early chill that lets you believe time is honest and seasons mean something. Eli sat outside with his knees up, staring into the fire ring like a man waiting for a flame that wasn't there. "You heard it," I said. He didn't look up. "Heard what?" "The laughter." He rubbed his jaw the way he does when he's trying on a lie. "I heard something. It was laughing." "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Didn't feel like it cared if we heard. That's the part I didn't like. Usually coyotes don't, you know." That wasn't coyotes. He stood and stretched, shook the stiffness out of his arms. "We'll pack up after breakfast." "Sure," I said, and then because I don't always say the smart thing, I said, "We could look around first, see if someone else is camped near. Make sure we're not, crazy," he offered. "Rude." He grinned despite himself. 20 minutes. Then we're out. We left the tent standing like a promise and followed the creek south. The forest changed as we moved. The pines thickened, their trunks closing ranks, and the ferns at our feet grew taller, their fronds brushing our shins like someone testing the fabric of our pants. The first sign we weren't alone came 15 minutes in, a pair of footprints at the water's edge. Bare. Adult-sized. The toes were splayed wider than mine, like someone who never wore shoes. They led out of the creek and disappeared into the loam after a few steps, as if whoever made them had stepped into the air. Eli crouched and touched one with the back of his fingers, the way you check a skillet. "Cold." "Obviously." "No, I mean cold. Like the ground's cooler there." He looked up at me, his sarcasm melted off. "Feel it." I did. He was right. The print was actual cold, as if it had been poured there from a jar kept in a refrigerator. We stood up together, because that's what you do when you both decide to deny a small new fact at the same time. The second sign was a tree. It stood apart from the others, a towering ponderosa with bark the color of cinnamon bread. Its trunk was broader than our tent was long. Someone had hammered an old nail into the heart of it, and from the nail hung a length of twine tied in a series of knotted patterns. The knots weren't random. They repeated. 3 tight, 1 loose. 3 tight, 1 loose. Then a flat twist like a braid gone wrong, then the pattern again. "What does that say?" Eli asked, as if knots could speak. "Trail marker?" I said. "Trail of what?" I reached out without thinking and touched the braid. The twine was damp, though my fingers came away dry. A scent rose, faint and wild, and not of this century. Tallow? Pitched pine? Something used in an old kind of making. "We should go back," Eli said. We said 20 minutes. He looked at me the way he used to look when we dared each other to jump off the bridge into the river as kids. Part challenge, part permission. "Fine," he said. 2 more. We found the third sign right then. It wasn't a sign you can hang. It was one the land had made. Ahead, the trees opened around a small meadow, circular and wrong, like an eye. In the center stood what looked like a cairn, except no one stacked stones in that shape on purpose. A base of large rocks held a top rock that was too large to balance the way it did, like it had been set there by a machine or a joke. On that top stone, in the soft moss, someone had pressed a handprint. A child's hand, splayed, each finger longer than seems reasonable. Around the cairn lay circles of those same knotted twine patterns as at the tree, laid flat on the grass, nearly concealed. Eli whispered. "Okay." "Okay what?" I whispered back. "Because words change shape when you whisper them. They look smaller, safer." "Okay, we're done." He took a step back. We weren't invited. A titter of laughter gusted across the meadow like the kind of breeze you don't feel on your skin. Not at us. To itself. Then it stopped, as if amused by its own discretion. We didn't run. We walked the way we had come, choosing each footfall like a person crossing a creek on slippery stones. The forest allowed us to be careful. It allowed us to return to our little clearing where the tent waited like a faithful animal. Nothing had been taken. My jacket pillow lay where I'd left it. Our coffee cups leaned into each other like a couple at a bus stop. We tore down camp in minutes. The tarp folded wrong. The poles jammed. The stakes came up with more effort than they needed. My hands fumbled knots I could tie in my sleep. Eli coiled the guy lines too tight and threw them into the bag like snakes. Before we shouldered our packs, I went to the pine on the edge of the clearing, the one with the flat, easy bark, and For reasons I couldn't have explained to Eli if he'd asked. I pulled my pocket knife and scratched 4 letters into it. Don't. When I stepped back, the word had company. On the same trunk, higher than I could reach, a second line had already been cut with something sharper than my knife. A message I didn't put there. Come back? I stared until the letters doubled. The cut edges weren't fresh. The sap had dried into amber beads. It had been there before. My small warning now read like a dare. Don't divided by come back. Eli swung his pack on and saw my face. What? Nothing, I said, because what else could I say that would make him want to leave faster? I should have shown him. I didn't. I needed the choice to be mine. Let's go. We followed our own boot prints for the first mile. Then they thinned, the way prints do when you start cheating and stepping on roots to keep your soles dry. The blue survey tape appeared in clumps, and then not at all. We hit the creek and couldn't decide where we'd crossed, because water remembers you badly. We kept the sun on our left and guessed. Midday gaped overhead. Forest light is weird, like that bright enough to make you squint. And yet the ground seems to be evening. Eli swore softly when the chain across the road finally came into view. The posts stood the same distance apart. The do not enter sign winked like a friend pretending she doesn't know you at the bar to keep you safe. At the car, we tossed our packs into the trunk and shut it with too much force. The sound echoed into the trees like an announcement. I didn't look back. We drove, dust blooming in the rear view. Radio off because we were listening for something to follow and leave the forest with us. It didn't. That should be the end, right? 2 idiots go where they shouldn't, get spooked by the world that existed before they did, and leave. No blood, no bones. Just a story about how the woods feel older than your intention. 2 nights later, I woke again at 2:13. Not because someone laughed, because I was smiling. In the dream, I stood in that meadow with the wrong cairn, and someone braided twine around my wrists, not tight, just earnest, and whispered a counting rhyme I didn't recognize but understood. When I sat up in the dark, my left wrist bore a faint impression like something had rested there. My room smelled of cold earth. I didn't tell Eli. He'd started leaving me voice messages about apartment tours and a woman at his work who had a cat named Soup. He didn't mention the forest, and I didn't bring it up. There are things you don't give to other people to carry, even if they're your brother. On the 7th night, the dream changed. I wasn't standing. I was on my back, looking up at a circle of faces peering over me like a ring of moons. Children. Adults. None right. Eyes too wide or not at all. Mouths too small or too many teeth. Hair that moved, though there was no wind. They were smiling and not. They were wearing expressions they'd borrowed from us. Above them, pines arranged themselves into a ceiling. A voice more like a place than a person said, "Mark your day." I woke with my heart stepping on rakes. My phone said 2:13. In the kitchen, the calendar we'd stolen from the dentist's office hung crooked. My hand moved before I argued with it and drew a small circle around the date. I stared until the pen's ink bled through to the wall. In the morning, I pulled at the memory like a scab and decided it meant nothing. That afternoon, I decided the opposite. That night, I didn't sleep until the sun got serious. A week later, Eli called me from somewhere loud and happy and said, "You'll never guess what's spray painted under the bridge." "Try me," I said, already bracing. "Don't come back." Big letters. Someone added "please" in small letters after it. "Looks like your handwriting." "It's a phrase," I said. "Other people know how to not invite people to places." "Sure," he said, in a tone that meant he hadn't believed me since we were 8. That night, I went for a walk because my apartment felt like a held breath. Streetlights made domes on the sidewalk. The little city park at the end of my block smelled like cut grass, and the childhoods of people I didn't know. A boy on a scooter passed me, dragging one heel to brake, and for a second the sound made the hair on my arms lift, because it echoed a different sound, twine sliding across rough bark. I turned to go home and saw on the base of the park's big fir tree, a small thing tied where a child's hand could reach. A segment of twine with 3 tight knots. 1 loose, 3 tight, 1 loose. Then the flat braid. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. I could feel the damp without being wet, the smell of a century without decay. I backed away until the sidewalk let me turn my back on it like a sane person. I dreamed that night without sleeping. You know the kind when you're certain you're awake and making choices, but your choices make a logic that belongs to the place that wants you. I walked through my apartment door to find the forest waiting at the threshold, polite as a salesman. I stepped onto pine duff, and my floorboards creaked somewhere under layers of needles. The blue survey tape fluttered from the frames of my posters. When I looked away and then back, the knots had tied themselves across my bookshelf like a web. "You weren't invited," the place whispered. Not accusing, just accurate. "I know," I said aloud, and while the sound of my voice didn't play right in that space, it pleased something. Laughter rose, not cruel. Expectant. I didn't go back. This is the part I want you to believe. I didn't go back. I lived my days and turned my face toward the parts of the world that were paved and named and cataloged. I drove to work and learned the new coffee maker and waved to the neighbor who waters his fake plants. I answered Eli's text with thumbs up emojis and said soon a lot. But the forest came anyway, in pieces you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking. A wreath of cedar hung on an apartment door 3 floors down in July. A child pushed a toy truck made of knotted string across the laundromat floor. A gust of air in the stairwell smelled like creek water in a place where nothing should smell like water but piping. On the last day of July, a postcard showed up in my mailbox with no stamp. No writing on the back. The front was a photograph of a pine trunk. In the lower right, carved letters. "Come back." The edges of the card were damp, though the paper was not. I called Eli. "Okay," I said when he answered. "Okay," I lied. He didn't make me say which lie. "We need to tell someone," I said. "A ranger. The county. I don't know. I think people go out there." "And don't come back?" "And don't come back the same," I said. "Or at all." He was quiet a long time, and I thought he'd hung up, but then I heard him breathe like a person about to open a difficult door. "I went," he said. "What?" 2 days after we got home. Alone. I didn't want to tell you because I knew what you'd say. What did I say? You said it anyway. He drew breath again, and I realized he was walking, the sound of gravel under his voice. "I just wanted to see the meadow again, so I could prove to myself it was a place that existed. But when I got to where the chain is, the posts weren't there." "What do you mean, not there?" "I mean gone. Like there'd never been a road. Just trees the whole way down. But I kept walking because I remembered the way. Except there wasn't a way. It was all new. And I felt like if I made a bunch of noise, I would be imitating something that had already heard me. And I turned around and went home," he said. "Except it took longer than the walking in. My phone said 20 minutes one way and 2 hours the other. And when I got to my car, there was sap on my hands and no trees close enough for that to make sense." He paused. I had to pry the steering wheel out of my fingers. We didn't speak after that for a while. Sometimes silence is what a story needs to finish telling itself. In August, I moved apartments. New street. New calendar with stock photos of European cities I will never see. The first night in the new place, I opened the window because the air had been trapped by the last tenant's candle choices, and a moth the size of my hand drifted in and thumped against my ceiling light. "Moths don't land like that," they whisper. This one thudded, and when I got the glass and the paper to escort it out, I realized it wasn't a moth. It was a small knot of twine, wings braided in the pattern I knew. I put the glass down and went and slept in my car. You want a moral? Trespassing has consequences. Don't go where you aren't asked. The forest doesn't love you. Pick any. They're all true. And none of them account for the way the creek's surface remembers the sky, even when the sky doesn't deserve it. Here is the only thing I know that feels like it fits. Some places are keeping time with a different clock. They make calendars we don't understand. In theirs, a circle might mean here, and a cross might mean gone, and the word please may not exist the way we think it does. They hang their messages on nail and bark and breeze. They laugh the way a latch clicks when a door knows how to close itself. I didn't go back. But on the first day the air turned, when summer stepped backward and pretended to be spring, I woke at 2:13 again and sat up without fear. My room was empty except for me, and the ordinary hum of things that keep us alive. On the wall, my calendar had a new mark I didn't put there. A small loose knot of thread taped over the square that held the day Eli and I had crossed the chain and stepped into section 12. B. Under it, in pencil I recognized but couldn't claim, someone had written 2 words. Watch. Here. I didn't touch it. I didn't remove it. I turned the page to September and left the knot to hold the month down, a paperweight against the wind. And when I walk past the park at night, I look at the base of the fir and try to pretend I don't see fresh twine tied in patterns that move, even when the air stands still. You want me to say I learned my lesson, that curiosity is a thin wire over a deep ravine, that the laugh we heard that first night belonged to a person we could have helped if we had been braver and less superstitious. But I think bravery looks different in a place that doesn't think you belong. I think the boundary wasn't the chain or the sign or the blue tape. The boundary was the first laugh. It told us we were the joke, and we didn't get it. Don't go, or go and see nothing, or go and see too much. Mark your day however you need to. I scratched, "Don't embark," and the forest finished the sentence for me. That feels like the truth's texture. Half warning, half invitation, both carved deeper than you planned. Eli sent me a photo last week without context. The frame showed a slice of sidewalk, a storefront window reflecting clouds, and, at the edge, the lower trunk of a street tree with a small aluminum plaque screwed into it. Restoration area. Beneath the plaque, tied where a child's hand could reach, hung a braid. 3 tight, 1 loose. 3 tight, 1 loose. Flat twist. He didn't caption it. He didn't have to. I replied with a circle emoji and then deleted it because symbols don't stay in their pens when you use them lightly. Sometimes I wake to the smell of creek water when there's no water for miles, and I sit still in that smell and count to 3 and to 1, and I think about the meadow we found and how an opening that round can't happen without help. I hear a soft laugh from the kind of room that doesn't have walls, and I close my eyes, and I don't answer. Not out loud. I mark the day in my head instead, which might be exactly what was asked. The warehouse, at the edge of town. I never believed my delivery job could give me nightmares. It was boring work most days. Boxes, addresses, doorsteps. The only surprises were the occasional barking dog or a kid who ran out barefoot to snatch a package before I could scan it. But 6 months in, I drew a route that took me farther west than I'd ever gone. Past the strip malls, past the highway, past the last gas station where the lights hummed and flies circled the pumps. The address on my scanner looked ordinary enough. 1547 Wheeler Road. No company name, no apartment number. Just an address and the note. Signature required. When I turned off the paved road, my tires crunched gravel. Weeds slapped against the sides of the van, tall as men. The GPS lagged and spun, then froze with the blue arrow pointing at nothing. But when the brush opened, I saw it. A warehouse. It sat like a tumor at the edge of the lot. Corrugated steel walls dulled to gray. Roof panels dented like tin cans from storms. Every window was boarded up from the inside. No trucks, no signs, no company logo. Just a rectangle of decay surrounded by dirt and weeds. I checked the address again. 1547 Wheeler Road. My radio crackled faintly with static. I thought about calling dispatch, but the signal was bad, and I didn't want to sound incompetent. Maybe it was an old storage unit someone still rented. Maybe a contractor. I pulled the package from the back. Medium-sized plain brown box, taped neat. No weight to it, almost hollow. The label read, "Receiving Manager, 1547 Wheeler Road." That was all. The lot was silent. No wind. No insects. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. I climbed out, package tucked under my arm. My shoes sank slightly into the dirt. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked. The steel siding bore streaks of rust like dried blood. The boards over the windows weren't nailed haphazardly. They were aligned, measured, cut to fit flush. Someone had taken time sealing the world out, or sealing something in. The front door was ajar. Just a few inches, enough to show darkness inside. I hesitated at the threshold, balancing the package in one hand, phone in the other. Ring bell. Get signature. Go home. That's what I told myself. But there was no bell. I pushed the door. Hinges squealed. The air inside hit me like the breath of a cave, damp, sour, and faintly sweet like rotting fruit. My footsteps echoed against bare concrete. Rows of metal shelving stretched into the gloom. Most empty, some sagging with collapsed cardboard. The ceiling rose high, rafters lost in shadow. "Hello?" My voice went upward, swallowed whole. No answer. I took 3 steps, then 5, listening to the echo multiply itself. I considered setting the package on the nearest shelf, snapping a photo for proof. But signature required kept circling my brain. My supervisor checked every scan. Then I saw it. Light. A faint yellow glow deeper in, steady as a candle. It leaked from a door at the far wall. An office, maybe? I followed. My shoes scraped dust. Something small scuttled across the floor, but I couldn't see it. The closer I got, the more I heard. A soft hum, like electricity, but uneven. The office door was half open. A lamp burned inside, its shade tilted, bulb warm gold. I knocked. Delivery for receiving manager? Silence. I pushed the door. The office looked used. A desk, cluttered with neatly stacked papers, no dust on them. A swivel chair. A lamp. Against the far wall, a bedroll laid on a thin mattress. A water bottle, half full, glistened on the floor beside it. And on the mattress, under a gray blanket, lay a shape. Long. Human. Still. He swallowed. Hello? The shape moved. Slowly. Like a breath pushing up from under the blanket. I stepped back, bumping the door frame. The door swung shut behind me with a click. I hadn't touched it. The lamp flickered, dimmed. Then a voice. From the bed. Low, rasping, dragged across concrete. You're late. My skin turned ice. The blanket slid off as the figure sat up. The face that emerged was wrong. The skin was pale, stretched thin like wax paper over bone. The eyes weren't eyes, they were holes, dark sockets that reflected nothing. The mouth hung slightly open, as if frozen mid-syllable. I dropped the package. It landed with a hollow thud. I lunged for the door. The handle twisted uselessly under my grip. Locked. Behind me, something thudded, feet hitting concrete. The figure unfolded from the bed in one motion. Limbs too long, joints bending like hinges that hadn't been oiled in years. The rasping voice again. Closer now. You brought me another. I yanked the handle until my wrist screamed. Suddenly, it gave. The door burst open and I stumbled back into the warehouse. My shoes slapped the concrete. My breath roared in my ears. I didn't dare look back. But I heard it. The footsteps. Not running, just steady, deliberate, keeping pace though I sprinted. The shelving blurred as I ran. I aimed for the faint outline of the open door at the front. Then I froze. Someone was standing in it. Another figure. Still. Pale. Watching. My chest seized. I forced myself forward anyway, screaming, flashlight clutched like a weapon. The beam swept over the face, empty sockets, that same stretched skin. Then, it was gone. Vanished between steps. I didn't stop. I slammed through the doorway, into the night, into air that felt alive. The van waited. My keys fumbled, but found the lock. Engine coughing, headlights stabbing weeds. I didn't look back until Wheeler Road was a smear in the mirrors. At the depot, I marked the package undeliverable. My supervisor frowned, but didn't press. That night, I locked my apartment door, double-bolted the windows. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone, telling myself it had been a squatter, a hallucination, anything but what I'd seen. The package kept replaying in my mind how light it felt, as if it were empty. At Undolzam, my phone buzzed. A new assignment. Same label. Same address. Same warehouse. And in the notes section, where special instructions usually went, someone had typed in block letters. Leave package inside. Don't knock. Aftermath. I didn't take the job. I logged out of the system, threw the phone under my couch. But the next morning, a brown box sat outside my apartment door. Plain, taped neat, no label. When I lifted it, it felt hollow. I didn't open it. I left it in the trash room down the hall. That night, I woke to a sound outside my bedroom door. A package being set down. And a voice, soft as rust scraping steel, saying, "You're late."